give more returns. Get more security and more interest on your fixed deposits from Sri Lanka's largest finance company, LMDtv Finance.
To curb corruption, one must be courageous to confront and rise up against the corrupt. Sleep well, be guided by ethics and standards for peace of mind. Refresh Sri Lanka for a civic-minded society. LMD, the voice of business.
Hello and welcome to LMDtv. Tonight on the forum, the topic of discussion is connecting Sri Lankans. And we're talking with Charles Rohan De Alwis, who is the General Secretary and also one of the directors of the Sri Lanka UK Chamber of Commerce. Mr. De Alwis, it's very nice having you on the show.
It is a pleasure indeed to be on this program. Thanks for inviting.
To start off our conversation, let's talk about Sri Lankans. What is your assessment of the prevailing state of Sri Lankans in the island and around the world as a people?
That's a very good question to start off, because you're asking about Sri Lankans as opposed to Sri Lanka. So basically, the Sri Lankans as a nation, whether we are based in Sri Lanka or overseas, is all connected together by the cultural aspects, the people aspects, and so on. So it doesn't matter where we live. We are all connected to Sri Lanka one way or the other. Now, primarily Sri Lankans are a very resilient bunch of people, and adverse conditions it's something not new to us. Almost 500 years of colonization, then of course post-independent Sri Lanka, and then of course the various crises that we have had, both natural and man-made. We have always survived. But I think it's important now to get out of that mindset of just survival, because beyond survival, you need to live. And I think that's where we are trying to achieve, because after hitting rock bottom during the COVID, possibly 2019, the Easter Sunday attacks, then the COVID, and then of course the economic crisis, we can't go down any further. So we hit rock bottom, and this is a fantastic opportunity out of a crisis to come out of this thing from survival mode into living. I mean, that's what other countries, even India, since it hit rock bottom in 1991, they've come out pretty steadily. And the East Asian countries, Southeast Asian countries, they're all developing rapidly because they hit rock bottom and they've since come up. But I think that's the important thing for us, whether we are part of the people, part of the government, part of the opposition, and everyone, whether one is living in Sri Lanka or expatriate Sri Lankan. This is a fantastic opportunity to come out of the problems.
Connections are key to survival. How can connections, especially global connections, help us progress as a nation, especially now that, like you said, we are starting from scratch?
Yeah, communications and connections, networking, all of that to me is the same thing. I think the social science word is social intercourse, and that's the communication. That has to happen, and it has to happen not just at government to government, business to business levels, but at all levels. So this is where I think we need to sing from the same hymn sheet as Sri Lankans, not below that, as whether we are Sinhalese, Tamils, Muslims, Burgher, Malay, whatever, that's secondary. So I think it's very important that connections are made, and irrespective of political thought processes, convictions, whether one is capitalist or socialist or communist, we really need to work across to come out of this situation. So communications basically is key to this. And this is where I think from a trade development standpoint, the chambers of commerce. I'm representing the Sri Lanka United Kingdom Chamber of Commerce in London. But I'm not talking just of one chamber, but across all the chambers and other business associations and so on. We really need to put our flag out, put our tent out if you're overseas, and say, hey, we're not just only in Sri Lanka, 5,500 miles away, but we are also here in each of your towns, cities, and so on. Sri Lanka is open for business.
What is your assessment of the Sri Lankan diaspora in terms of professional networking?
Professional networking, again, is happening. Previous to the professional networks, there were personal connections. During the days of the civil conflict, those personal relationships in certain segments were affected overseas. But since 2009, 2010, the vast mainstream of all our communities who are Sri Lankan, and I emphasize on the words vast mainstream. There will still be minorities on the extremes, and I mean majorities as well, people in the extremes, but they're a minority. They have come together and they are seeing that the usual phrase, divided we fall, the united we stand, divided we fall, phrase. So that's where the personal connections have come about. And more importantly, now talking about the professional connections, I think there is a good network of still not through one body, but through various bodies based on personal as well as LinkedIn and various other professional connections of associations and so on, individuals. That international connectivity of professionals is there, but has it gained momentum to help Sri Lanka? I think it is happening, but professionals themselves cannot make the change. It has to be a 360-degree, fully integrated approach. And I don't think we are there yet. We are working on it.
Let's talk about Sri Lankans in the UK. Can you profile them for us in terms of demographics, behavior, and other aspects as well?
Yeah, I mean, all of the aspects that you mentioned have been fluid, fast changing. And historically, the Sri Lankan migration into the United Kingdom has been exclusively in the professional classes. And that was the case till about the mid to late 1980s. Then there were large influxes of people from Sri Lanka into the United Kingdom at all levels. Now, that really changed the social balance. And now we have, I think, from the United Kingdom Home Office figures, almost 400 to 500,000 Sri Lankans. Now, with that, the professional class that I spoke about have automatically or immediately become the minority professional class people, the numbers I mean. And the first generation Sri Lankans, percentage by Tamils, Sinhalese, Muslims, and then of course very small numbers of Burgher and Malay people, all Sri Lankans, but giving percentages and so on. They have the first generation, they were the pioneers. I call them pioneers because they ventured into a land which is completely different to Sri Lanka. The working culture is totally different. Sometimes we live to work, while Sri Lanka might be the other way around, and so on. And the social cultures are very much me first, I survive, I then help someone else approach. And it has worked out very well in the West. And Sri Lankans too have benefited from that. In relation to the demographies and so on, I think the professionals, as I said a few minutes ago, a small minority now. We have a lot of care workers coming in, and also hospitality trade. Then, of course, self-employed business people running small shops to large-ish supermarkets, not the giant ones or the multinational ones. And also within the British civil service and British government. So it's from what I call from A to Z. We have Sri Lankans in all walks of life represented as British. That's the difference. Just like how we are promoting the word Sri Lanka, Britain has been able to get over to a large extent their ethnicities, being English, Scottish, Irish, Welsh, Cornish from Cornwall, Manchester-based, Essex-based, all of that still exists inside our heads. But when we walk out of our doors into Main Street, we are British. So it's the same thing that we have to be Sri Lankans when we walk out of our front door, because it's important to keep the uniqueness of who you are within you. We belong to a race, ethnicity, religion, whatever, class, whatever. That's fine. If you want, you can keep it. If you want, you can discard it. But if you are conventional about it, please keep it. But when we are out in society, we are one. That is Sri Lanka.
Looking at the professional community of Sri Lankans in the UK, how connected are they? Because, in Sri Lanka, the working culture tends to revolve around, who knows who. Is it the same over there?
Not at all. I mean, you just take any Sri Lankan who has reached the top or the zenith, the apex positions in their careers. Now, first of all, we start with the huge minus factor, not being white. Let's be very open about it. Because straight away, they know you're not necessarily a local until they talk to you, and then they realize, well, this guy is actually from London or from Manchester or from Scotland, and so on. So basically, Sri Lankans have been able to work very well, reach top positions, and contribute to society. I mean, we have politicians of Sri Lankan origin in Parliament, in the United Kingdom, and in various aspects, in the diplomatic service, foreign service, as we call it here, and in Sri Lanka, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Sri Lanka, but I'm talking of the United Kingdom aspects. So we are all well represented, the professionals. I mean, historically, if I can digress for a couple of minutes, historically, we brought with us the baggage from Sri Lanka to work on a hierarchical basis. So if I'm a lawyer, so I would only join the lawyers associations with an S at the end. If I was a doctor, I would join a doctors association. If I was an old boy of a certain school, I would only join that school. Now that's a hierarchical, based system, and that's how the connections work. So what we have, actually, we don't have that sort of hierarchical societies anymore in the United Kingdom, and I think they stopped doing all of that since the 1950s. So they got a good 50, 60 years or 70 years of change already. And they've changed not for the sake of change, but they've actually made those changes. That's very important, because it's not just a headline to say we are changing, but the actual practical aspects. So just to give you a horizontal association that we Sri Lankans in the United Kingdom created, I think there is still one, and that is the Association of Professional Sri Lankans in the UK, APSL. The website, I think, is www.apsl.org.uk. It started with 2004, I think, with about 20 members. Very small start, but we were determined that merit is the sole factor that moves you from zero to hero, not how old you are, whether you are from an established profession or not. We also brought in, and we also expanded the definition of professional from the narrow interpretation that we have in Sri Lanka, where doctors, lawyers, engineers, accountants, and so on. We expanded into the academia as well, brought in academics, and then people with qualified business backgrounds, as well as business experts from experience. So that's very important. And we select people, office bearers, not because they are senior in age, but because they are pragmatic doers. So that's brought us in APSL about 500 odd members so far, which is a huge number. I know I said about 400,000 to 500,000 Sri Lankans live in the UK, but it's been an association that's been around since 2004 without interruption and without infighting, because the usual problem in Sri Lanka is infighting for positions. we also rotate the positions. So every 2 years, those who are capable, even though they are capable, they go out of office, someone else comes in. But those people who have been working very well and who have contributed to the upliftment of the small segment of Sri Lankan society, they keep working, but in a nondescript way, incognito way, they're just around working. So we all get a chance to go in the procession, but once you come out of the procession, the Perera I'm talking here, you work as a normal worker. So we've done a successful launch that was in 2004, and I'm proud to say that we have been able to maintain that because we are not talking about connections and seniority. We are only looking at who can get this job done. Now, if in the UK or in America, Australia, New Zealand, if the people who are running the countries and the businesses thought, well, I don't think he fits the job, he's just arrived 2 years ago. Yeah, he may be Sri Lankan qualified, but he doesn't have the same accent as we are, not the same color, all the negative vibes. There would not have been Chamat Palihapitias of the Facebook fame, Shamara Wickramanayakes of Australia, Macquarie fame, and Ranil Jayawardena, that is MP in London, in the Houses of Parliament. He was a minister as well, and many more. So that's the important thing. No connections. Connectivity, yes, but not based on connections that you go up or down. It's just on your performance. And there are very many Sri Lankans, not hundreds, but thousands of Sri Lankans, mainly professionals, who have reached the top places worldwide and not so worldwide, not so well known. Multinational sectors, private sector, hugely successful Sri Lankans, but Sri Lanka does not know of them. And they come to the state that, well, we got there from our own active hard work because I was able to work. Now, that's certainly not recognized most of the time in Sri Lanka.
It's time to take a very short break, but we'll soon be back to talk more about connecting Sri Lankans.
Display your brand message on digital screens at prime locations. The largest digital advertising network in Sri Lanka. Emerging Media.
You're mobile, and so are we.
Gets me going.
Grab the Lite 87 app at the Apple App Store or Google Play now.
87.8 and 87.6 island-wide. Lite 87.
Welcome back to the show. Tonight, we're talking with Charles Rohan De Alwis, who is the General Secretary and one of the directors of the Sri Lanka UK Chamber of Commerce. We spoke of the people. Now let's talk about the country, or should I say countries, Sri Lanka and the UK. Can you share your opinions on the state of bilateral trade between the two countries right now?
Yeah, I mean, bilateral trade between Sri Lanka and the United Kingdom is actually in favor of Sri Lanka, which is very good. This has to be contrasted with the balance of trade that we have with India, China, and some other countries, which is in their favor, not in our favor. So this is a great opportunity, and I think the current High Commissioner is exploiting that to benefit Sri Lanka, His Excellency Rohit Bogolagama, reaching into various government and private sector at various levels to exploit that surplus into a much bigger surplus in favor of Sri Lanka. Now, the Chamber is also at the forefront. That's the Sri Lanka United Kingdom Chamber of Commerce in London. We are also reaching out together, as well as in parallel, in our own right, with various trade bodies, individuals in ministries and in government and in the private sector, to ensure that the trading links which actually benefit Sri Lanka are continued, because the existing businesses, it's an old marketing saying, it says that it's far better to keep the existing client than spend a lot of money finding 10 different new clients, because you might never get those 10 new customers. So existing businesses. Now, don't forget one thing, 10% of tourist arrivals into Sri Lanka come from the United Kingdom. Now, it is right that the majority of the tourists I might get the numbers, the countries slightly wrong, the order, I mean. I think it's India, number one, China, number two. And because of the Ukraine war, a lot of Russian tourists come because they have only a limited number of destinations that they can travel relatively safely, and Sri Lanka is one. So, yes, we need to promote right round on a 360 degrees all the countries to get the tourists in. But the tourists that come from the United Kingdom, they bring the pound, the pound sterling, which is strong currency, and that's niche area must be at least got to a 20% of our arrivals, because then that will bring in, I always use the word small dollar and the big dollar, it will bring in big dollars as opposed to a trickle of small dollars, which is fine. Whether it's in the format of an Indian rupee or a Chinese yuan, doesn't matter as long as it trickles in. But get the big hits, you need to go after countries like Western Europe, Germany. Germans love Sri Lanka. I don't think they're coming in those numbers anymore. If you remember in 2004 when the tsunami hit, the former Chancellor of Germany, Helmut Kohl, I think, was in somewhere down south. So there are niche areas that Sri Lanka will have to exploit further to make that trade surplus grow. So your question was about the United Kingdom. I'm still talking about the United Kingdom with a few distractions here and there. So the balance of trade is very healthy in favor of Sri Lanka. And we need to do everything to promote that, further enhance that. From the Chamber standpoint, it is there to promote bilateral trade. So let's get that clear. It's the United Kingdom buying from Sri Lanka and Sri Lanka buying from the United Kingdom. So that's one. But from a point of view of our Sri Lankan economy, you asked, then it's very much in favor of Sri Lanka.
I'm going to ask you a question about something that everyone's talking about over here. I don't know about it over there. What are your views on the brain drain that is affecting Sri Lanka right now? And how can we mitigate the ill effects of it whilst, of course, harnessing the benefits?
Now, that's a very good question and a difficult question to answer and find an answer in the next 3 minutes. However, the brain drain, because I also have the opposite of that, I call it the brain gain, GAIN. It's a double-edged sword. On a connected basis, as Sri Lanka is connected to the rest of the world, there has to be two-way fluidity. So there can be brain drain, and equally there should be brain gain. So it's a two-way flow. If you subdivided your question and asked, am I in favor of or against brain drain going out, my simple answer is no. Anyone who wants to leave the country, they should be free to go. Anyone who wants to come back to the country, they should be free to come. And also, the government should encourage and provide incentives to non-resident Sri Lankans to come back and then be part of that economy. Because if once an expatriate Sri Lankan returns, he will not only bring himself his money, but he will also bring his expertise. So it's no point asking Sri Lankans who are abroad to come back when they are 75 or 65 or 75 years of age, just for that retirement money. We need to encourage people to come back to Sri Lanka. But that's on the brain gain aspects. But the main question is, how do we deal with the brain drain? Well, there is no easy solution. Whenever I have networked or spoken with various people from the Sri Lanka government as well, I have always said the amount of young people coming out of our own universities and higher education institutions, whether it's private or government sector, is not enough to fill the vacancies. Even if you take the tech sector, IT sector, I think we have only 0.1% of $8 or $9 billion worldwide industry. I mean, to say we get $1 billion from the tech industry every year is great, but that's not so great when you compare how much the other countries are making. It's a bit like saying we have 10% of tourists coming to Sri Lanka from the United Kingdom, but the numbers are small. You need to double that. So that quantum leap has to come from, not from people like you and I on a TV show, but from the planners, and the plan has to be implemented. Now, if you speak to a politician, whether it was yesterday, today, or even tomorrow, they will say, oh, yeah, we have all the plans. But my problem is all of these people they forget halfway through to implement the plan, or they start a big launch of a plan implementation. And after that, we all forget and it all goes downhill. So planning is one thing. I think we have it there, the macro plans, plan implementation and monitoring it on a regular basis, not for just 6 months, but a good 10 years. And that's what we lack, I think. So it's important to get the tertiary education sector, and I may be using the word tertiary in a wrong sense. I'm referring to technical colleges, etc. A classic case, everyone doesn't have to go to university. And that's just one of those crazy things that we have got into our heads, that you have to, after A-levels, you have to go to university. Yes, fine. But if you're not good enough to go to university, or you don't want to go to university, there are other aspects, the technical aspects. I mean, the classic case in point is the Ceylon German Technical Training Institute. I think I'm going to say Ratmalana, near the airport. That's been there for a long period of time. They used to produce great technical people, not graduates, but technically qualified people. All of a sudden, Australia opened its doors for that sector, that segment. Most of that talent went to Australia. And they are in fantastic places, in very senior positions, sometimes in positions higher than the qualified university and PhD qualified counterparts. So we really need to think how to change the workforce. And when I say workforce, it's blue collar and white collar, every aspect, to suit the growing needs, the demands of not Sri Lanka, but Sri Lanka and the world. Because we are already part of a larger supply chain. We are a very small link, but we need to make that link very strong. Just like, as we said before, Singapore is, Malaysia is, and all of a sudden, India is a giant link in a large chain. So we have to learn a lot from how others are doing things, but equally, if our politicians and the civil servants do not come up with a cohesive plan and plan implementation for the next 10, 15 years on a continual basis, we won't get out of this problem.
We're almost at the end of our conversation, but before we let you go, any closing thoughts you'd like to share with our audience tonight?
I'm an optimist, not for the sake of saying it, but I always say the glass is half full as opposed to glass is half empty. Because if it's half empty and you're thinking negatively, we can never come out of the problems. And optimistically, I say we have hit rock bottom and we've started the journey upwards. And it's important to note that we have started on it. We have a long way to go. And I think as a society, if we all get together, consider ourselves Sri Lankans and work towards it with the right guidance from the government, as well as the civil servants and the private sector. The private sector has a huge role to play in this. And of course, not trying to put the blame on them for overall failures, but the private sector must also wake up and get out and do what is right from their business plans. Not necessarily, I'm not talking of social service and doing projects to get brownie points, but start the things that they should be doing in Sri Lanka. And also the multinational or the international sector, private sector in Sri Lanka which has already started, they should be looking out as the world is a small place. And that if they keep the head offices, the main centers in Sri Lanka, then again, that will bring in more funds into Sri Lanka. And of course, we need to have an equitable taxation system, not necessarily change it on an ad hoc basis. Now, these are the issues. I think consistent policies should be there, and to minimize corruption. I mean, it's nice to say we can eradicate corruption, but it can't be done overnight. But to minimize corruption, clean governance, good governance, and all of that should come in.
We've been talking with Charles Rohan De Alwis, attached to the Sri Lanka UK Chamber of Commerce. Mr. De Alwis, it was very nice having you on the show, and thank you for a very interesting and insightful conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on this program.
And to all our viewers, thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, take care.
Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for watching and stay safe.